sometimes people see the urbanization of rural India and think that are people still going to be farmers? But interestingly, the number of farmers in India has grown from 200 million before COVID to 260 million post-COVID. So the number of people who are in agriculture and are looking for ways to make it a source of livelihood is increasing. But at the same time, many of these farmers continue to remain at low levels of productivity and incomes, and often even struggle to have enough food on their table. And even where we worked back in 2006 in the Kanakpura area, they were just starting to build like the nice ring road around Bangalore at that time, and they were beginning to stake some of the road highway workers on some of the farmers' fields. And at the time we were wondering, are these farmers going to still remain in agriculture? Flash forward 19 years, they still are. And in fact, many of like the families that I knew when we were just starting Digital Green, and I would spend time with that organization, Green Foundation in Kanakpura, like the next generation of kids who are now parents, like 19 years later, usually they'll have one kid who is still into agriculture and farming, and another kid who might be like, doing some kind of LIC insurance or bank job.
I think it's picking.
They're still in. And there's still a major need. Now, the conventional way in which folks have tried to assist farmers in trying to increase their productivity and their incomes has been through in-person agricultural extension services, which is the adult education of farmers. Some of you who might work in health-related NGOs be familiar with like community health workers like ASHAs and Anganwadi workers. And similarly, in the agricultural space, there are these cadre of animators or village resource people, different names, community resource people, who are out with these rural communities and mobilizing them into women self-help groups, farmer producer organizations, to try to collectivize these very small farmers who often are just cultivating half-acre to 1-acre plots, and are trying to help connect them to markets, access to finance, teach them about practices or technologies that can boost their productivity. But that comes at a significant cost. The government of India's own NSSO survey found that less than 6% of farmers actually rely upon these agricultural extension agents as a source of information. And as you can imagine, these farms are diverse and the terrains are difficult to navigate, and especially with climate change, it's even more hard for a single extension agent to be a person who can triage the diversity of different types of issues that these farmers are facing. And so it comes at this cost of effort to one farmer each through these in-person extension programs. When we started with Green Foundation 19 years ago, we were inspired actually by a program that was working in primary school education, which is why I think this whole AI cohort thing that Tech4Dev is organizing is amazing, because cross-pollination across sectors is very good. And we were inspired, in fact, by a primary education program that was called the Digital Study Hall. Basically, a computer science professor from Princeton, back in 2005, had partnered with a private school teacher in Lucknow. And he kind of came to the realization that the private schools were great in a place like Lucknow, but the rural government school teachers were not having the most amazing pedagogy in the classroom. So what he began was to have these private school teachers teach after school lessons to slum school kids, science, math, and English lessons, record them on video, and then show them on TVs and VCD players to surrounding government schools. And what was found is that initially the teacher would use this as a crutch to improve how she taught in the classroom, but eventually she just internalized this and then would just become a better teacher. And so we came around in like 2006, like kind of a year after them, and we were interested in seeing how can you adapt that approach in the agricultural space, which is totally different. because you don't have a set curriculum like you have in education, and you're dealing with like an adult population of farmers, unlike kids. And so we need to figure out ways to engage them where they were. But where we landed, just working with that Green Foundation outside of Kanapura, was using videos by and for farmers. Because the first questions that people would ask was not about the ROI of practice in the video, but rather what's the name of the person video, which village is he or she from, to say that if this farmer can do it, then maybe I can too. And by taking a one-to-one demonstration that this NGO was already doing, capturing my video and taking it to more people, you can obviously see economies of scale in the process. Then COVID happened, and our in-person showing of these videos basically had to stop. These self-help groups of women couldn't come back together, but we saw as many more of these farmers were coming online. We had been posting our videos, these local language videos in 40 different languages onto YouTube since 2009. But during COVID, we got about 100 million views to these local language how-to videos. These aren't professional productions, they're amateur productions, short 8 to 10-minute testimonials and demonstrations. And as this reverse migration took place when there was lockdowns here in the cities, and the rural youth went back to the villages, they took their phones with them, and they ended up searching on places like YouTube for information, including on our channel. And at the same time, kind of towards the end of COVID, GPT-3 came out. And that's when we began this journey of seeing how could we combine the fact that many more of these farmers were online with the capabilities of AI so that they could then be able to use multimodal ways of engaging with this content. So initially we just tried to use these off-the-shelf models, and I'm sure as many of you have probably tried. They are amazing models, ChatGPT, Gemini, Llama, but at the same time they can do wonky responses, even for like a particular query like that this woman in Andhra was asking about some tomato leaf yellowing issue. Initially, some of these models would say that, like, oh, you should apply salt to your soil. Anyone who knows or has planted anything in the past, applying salt to soil is what you kill your plants, right? So these models have not been tuned for the agricultural domain or these particular contexts. They'll often obviously hallucinate. They're not going to be able to talk in the vernacular that farmers use, for example. They don't use chemical terms. They don't use percentages or acreage terms. They have their own local vernacular of using thumb rules like bags of produce that I've created or bottle caps full of some inoculant that they might want to apply. And then, of course, the largest frontier models are amazing, and we all use them every day, but of course they're also very expensive to expect to be able to scale. So when we began developing what we call now Farmer Chat about 3 years ago, we wanted to see how could we make the info, this knowledge base that we could provide to this AI system was locally relevant and seasonally specific to these communities, because they're not looking for generic ChatGPT answers or Wikipedia answers. They're looking for something that's highly contextualized themselves. And then seeing is believing in agriculture. That's why our videos worked, because people could recognize the people in the videos or the leaves or the animals in them. So similarly, integrating with voice and photo capability was super critical because it's obviously extremely difficult to explain a particular pattern of a yellowing or a wilting issue, or even to know the technical name of a pest, but just being able to take a photograph of it. That anyone can do. And to be able, and also obviously very important to support local languages. And also we found that small language models actually often are outperforming on a quality basis the responses relative to the bigger models, and of course are much cheaper and are much faster. So that's what Farmer Chat is. It's a local language, voice, text, and image application that we initially began on WhatsApp and Telegram, and then we migrated over to a standalone Android app. Reason for that was a combo of being able to have greater control over the user experience, having greater access to the data, WhatsApp, these comms systems that are end-to-end encrypted give you that kind of access. Cheaper, because then you don't have to pay the WhatsApp business API fees. And then fourth, we've been able to negotiate with some of the telecom operators in places like Africa, zero rating agreements, so that for farmers where the data costs are high in some parts of Africa, not so much of a concern here in India, then they don't have to pay the data cost because you're able to whitelist that IP address of the app. So what are some of the components that make it different? One is like the need to be able to support these local languages. The big tech folks are obviously covering a lot of languages. You may have seen Meta just released an Omni speech model a week or two ago, 10 days ago. And it covers 1,400 languages. This is amazing. Meta even has this like leave no language behind kind of initiative. But a lot of their models have been trained on things like the King James Bible to do like translation across lots of different languages. And that has an after effect, including in the agricultural world, wherein the word rust, for example, is a disease when it comes to wheat, but of course it's like iron rust in like normal kind of like context or biblical context. So there's a need to like tune the models for this particular vocabulary that these farmers use. And then the second is there are some amazing like deterministic models that researchers international here in India, like the Indian Council of Ag Research, have created for site-specific fertilizer, irrigation, feed ration advice for cattle dairy farmers. And those models have been developed from the ground up through validation in the field. And an out-of-the-box Gen AI solution that does like non-deterministic things is not the best for those kind of scenarios. You actually want to know for my location, my soil condition, my weather profile, my terrain, what's the right answer? So rather than just like push every single query to the large or small language model, we can actually parse a query and route it to like a deterministic model that might provide a better solution. And then people are looking for static information. Agriculture is super dynamic. Your soil, your weather, all these kind of considerations are going to have a huge impact to the information that is most relevant to you. So we integrate weather and where possible market info into these responses. That happens basically like through a RAG kind of like based call that integrates with the response that is generated by a large language model. And then of course the whole point of these AI systems is that they're not meant to be static. They're supposed to be learning with every farmer's query. And I think that's been the most exciting thing for us, which is like the AI systems are not perfect, of course, out of the box. But you get to see what are the farmers actually asking about. How do they ask it? What kind of photographs do they submit? Like low contrast with basic phones that aren't going to be as fancy as our phones. And of course, like these vision systems like GPT Vision are amazing to be able to describe an image, but they're not like tuned specifically to recognize different livestock diseases or different crop issues. But the great thing is you can actually use the photographs that you gather to then do this kind of training so that it does better respond to them. And what's interesting is when you do that kind of exercise, we've gotten about, I think now about 6.5 million odd queries. And in 15 different languages across 6 countries. And we now employ kind of a cadre of local agronomists here in India at a state level. So that there's basically like 5 agronomists in the state of Bihar who look at a subset of queries. So far they've looked at about 12,000 queries in Bihar. And I'll show you the system, but they basically review, score, and fix the responses that the AI system generates. You can't see it really well, but like what you're seeing on the far right graph is how when you look at the scores that the local agronomists give vis-a-vis different crops, the AI systems perform differently, right? And of course, all these neural networks are black boxes, so no one really knows what's internally happening is what is the input, the question, and what is the output, the response. And then you have these local agronomists review and fix. And you can see that for certain crops, some of these models are not performing so good for crops like lentil, or jute is the bottom one. But they're performing okay, I guess, for certain crops like potato and tomato. So what does that suggest? It suggests like, hey, look, we should make those fixes, but then it suggests also that we could augment the knowledge base of these models with areas that they're weaker in. And then use that as input to do a supervised fine-tuning operation to create sort of a more relevant model that performs greater quality. I can show, let me just show this system that, so this is like how that reinforcement learning system works. So these are actual questions that a farmer asked. Now, of course, in this case, it's been if it was a voice note, it's transcribed and translated into English, so these are English kind of translations of that query. For certain languages like Hindi, we're able to stay in like that language to avoid a translation step, but for like a lot of other languages, like Odia, Telugu, here in India, or some of the languages that we work in Africa, we have to kind of take the error hit with translation because the large or small language models don't operate very well in those base languages. But then what you see is the question that the farmer asked, and then the response that the AI system generated. And this is the tool that not the farmers use, but this is the tool that the local agronomist uses to review the response that the AI system generated, to then say which component of the response might be right or wrong, and then where they can score it, provide additional info, that kind of thing. And what this particular system is doing is to create the so-called golden question answer set for setting sort of the policy function of the model, which is important. Like in the agricultural world, for example, like maybe there's some places that you want to promote agroecological ways of cultivation, not conventional means of cultivation, which could be detrimental to the soil. So sometimes like these models might go off the rails, but this is how you kind of guardrail that. Then there's this other view, which is like a comparative view. Again, a question from the farmer at the top, but what then the agronomist is doing is comparing in a blinded way the output of two different models and saying which is better, or is the same, or maybe both are bad. The response that you're seeing, kind of model A versus model B. What this does is help to tune the reward function of the model to say which is a better response to give. Maybe it's based on tone, or style, or personalization. And then same kind of thing we also do for the pictures. We have now, I think, accumulated something around 200,000 odd photos. And for some of them, these models are not able to classify. But like what we do find that the AI models are good at is like describing what it is. Sometimes it doesn't know what it is, like, oh, what is this thing? But like it can describe that, oh, it's like a stalk with like some browning on the leaf in some particular pattern. And then we can match that kind of pattern description with an annotation that the local agronomist again provides. And in other cases, like the AI system does generate some kind of response, like saying that this is a thrips pest issue for tomatoes, but it could be wrong. And so then this is a system for the local agronomist to sort of say what's right or wrong about it. And then the final thing I'll show is we also have this multiple choice kind of response wherein we are running the same query across multiple models, extracting the facts across multiple models, and then what you're seeing here is a union in response to that farmer's query, the union of all the possible answers that different models have outputted. And then what the local agronomist's job is to do is for this place in Bihar, for the crop of brinjal, which for this question about natural remedy stuff, is meant to then select which are the options that you want to give to a farmer. Because in agricultural context, often there might be some things that are totally wrong, like you should just not do. But then there might also be some gray area about, depending on your context, you might do this or you might do that. If you're an upland farmer, maybe you don't need a drainage, but maybe in a lowland farmer, maybe you do need drainage, like that kind of thing. And sometimes these facts that the models generate are sometimes in conflict with each other. So obviously you don't want to give conflicting information to the farmer that they then are confused by. Rather here, this person can then select like, which are the kind of couple options that they might want to present to the farmer as an appropriate response. Or it's also possible that none of these answers are good, and then we need to like be able to provide an alternative. So that's kind of how this whole evaluation and reinforcement learning system kind of works. The other piece I want to mention is that like, especially as you all are probably working on various versions of bots, right? Maybe on WhatsApp, maybe on Instagram bot, is that we've kind of realized that, including from our historical work with videos by and for farmers, one part of the equation is like accuracy to create trust, but another element is like the social dimension, like for farmers to be able to establish trust that this is something relevant to me. So in our Farmer Chat application, we've also integrated the kind of library of farmer-to-farmer videos that we had historically created, and have created also abilities for people to submit their own, because it still is important for people to connect with information. They're not just wanting to talk to an abstract bot. And then in agricultural contexts, and I think in general, it's often quite hard for people to articulate what are the questions that they need answers to. We might all use ChatGPT all the time, but for farmers, sometimes it's like challenging to say, what is this empty text box supposed to be for? But in reality, like if you're my neighbor and you had a pest attack on your tomato crop, and I'm growing a tomato, it's like quite probable that I might already have that same pest as you. So rather than wait for the farmer to ask the question, we can just suggest proximate questions that neighbors to you are also having that you might just want to tackle. Or also in agricultural world, which is probably true, I guess, in like health and educational spaces, there's also like a sequence of events that happens as per the year, right? That is like seasonal and location basis. Like this time of year, like people are not going to be planting rice, right? So like you don't want to be promoting like a practice around rice planting, right? It's going to be more of like the vegetable cultivation time of year. So like we can kind of share, and there's going to be a lot of like pest and disease outbreaks as horticulture gets super afflicted by all those kind of things. So this is the time of year to kind of suggest questions related to that based on your location at the time. And then also like we've been kind of creating ways for these farming communities to be seen as role models in their communities. Even when we were doing the totally offline showing of videos in self-help group kind of settings, a lot of people would be incentivized to like apply a practice so that they could be featured in a future video as a role model that their other peers could be inspired by. So same, we're trying to like create within the Farmer Chat application so farmers can kind of see themselves as role models within their respective communities. Yes, now we have about 670K people who are using this application. They ask about 10 questions per farmer per month. 86% of the queries are in local language. We still have like about 14% in English. It's mostly from Kenya, where the language support isn't good enough for like their languages, and so they kind of found that falling back to English works better for them. But we're trying to work on trying to support like their languages. But it's kind of interesting to see their usage patterns. People prefer, of course, their most local language that they are most familiar with. But then if the system fails for them, they'll try to go to the next order language, and if that still fails, they'll try to go to like usually English ultimately as a default if like the systems don't work. Or they'll just use photos. And so we've actually, as like photo and voice support has increased in quality, we're finding a much greater usage of those modalities. So 45% of the queries are non-text, are in voice and photo. And then in terms of like impact, because these farmers are now able to ask questions on their own volition on demand for their particular context and place and time of year, relative to the in-person extension services that got about 6% of farmers to apply those practices, as I mentioned, our video work helped to increase that, like around 2 to 3x to 15%, which was like great. We were all like very happy about that. But now it's like another order of magnitude greater, 60% rate of farmers applying practices that they learn about in farmer chat. This was from like a third-party study that some organization called 60 Decibels run. And our hypothesis about that is because like the queries are more on demand relative to the videos, where sometimes they would fall flat. Even in a self-help group of 15 people, some farmers might grow rice, some might be into livestock, some might be into horticulture. We could never do that degree of customization that obviously these AI systems are great at. And then on the cost side of the equation, the in-person extension system costs about $35 US to get one farmer to apply a practice. Our videos, that would take a one-to-one demonstration to many, drop that cost to $3.5 US. But now, especially with these small language models, the cost is super low. We're currently at, I think, about 0.05 cents per query on average. There's differences in cost depending on whether it's a multimodal voice, text, image query. But yeah, the cost continue to drop. And with each farmer's interaction with the system, it's generating a data point or a signal that both helps to inform and improve the model, as I was showing with how we do this full supervised fine-tuning operation on small models. But even more than that, it also helps to inform some of our government and research partners to inform what are the actual issues that these farmers are facing. And it keeps changing, especially with the dynamic climate, market dynamics. Some places we're more into stable commodities, and then now we're doing higher value crops production. And then these government and research folks can then target different programs, different support services, different research agendas in a more specific way based on what the actual needs and interests of the communities are. So yeah, what's also exciting is that we're seeing a 38% monthly active use with 11 queries per farmer per month, as I mentioned. Farmers are also, though I also mentioned, aren't just like looking for info. They're looking for also services, like ways that I can buy a better seed or where I can sell my produce. What's great is that there are these existing programs. Like the government has huge programs focused on farmer-producer organization mobilization. There's huge networks of agri-tech startups who try to provide seeds and access to capital and things. So what we're experimenting right now is to see, could we layer in some of these relevant win-win type of ads or lead generation opportunities for farmers. We don't want to obviously promote spam or exploitative information to these farmers, but is there a way that we could share win-win opportunities for farmers to connect with some of these market actors that can connect information with action, so that when you ask a question about tomato disease issues, then you can not just learn about how to cure it, but I can also get a piece of information about where to maybe purchase the remedy if I need to buy it from some local store. And could that help us to kind of perhaps get to some break-even point in the business model? In the past, like we've been doing this for 19 years, we could never imagine that that would be possible. But as these AI costs are continuing to drop, we think it might. And it's also changing how we as an organization operate. In the past, the whole way that we were working was to embed all of our way of producing and showing videos into our government and NGO partners' structures. And we would consider that institutionalization of the whole system end-to-end, so that they could run the whole operation of producing videos and showing videos. But now, with the AI systems developing so fast and getting so cheap, we're seeing now this possibility that like, we still want to engage those government and other actors, but we can be more able to connect directly to the farmers and see their demand signals if we're providing this service direct to farmer. I think it's my last slide. But yeah, this is personally my most exciting revelation from like the last 2-3 years that we've been doing Farmer Chat. It's been really the flipping of the agricultural extension paradigm, which for long has always been from government research centers to extension agents or these frontline workers, and then ultimately to the farmers in a very kind of top-down kind of way. But for the first time, these farmers now on demand can choose really what is the information that is most important to them. And that were just not possible when we started Digital Green. And it creates a way to think about the agricultural development space not as something that is being imposed on people, but something that people can choose on how they want to develop, whether on farm or beyond farming. And the kind of transformational change that we've seen in just the last 2 or 3 years has been like mind-blowing to see like farmers earning so much more money, sometimes getting enough to like be able to buy a secondary house or enter into a new cropping system, relative to like our earlier model where it was just incremental rates of change. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions?
Can you talk a bit about the audio capabilities and how they're advancing, especially with Indic languages and the rest common languages? And
Yeah.
experience that they
I think that, yeah, like speech to text and text to speech both are getting much better. There's also like people are trying to play around with real time, voice to voice. We haven't done so much of that. We're still sticking to like more of this whole pipeline of going from speech to text, in some cases translation, and then reversing the flow on the output side. There's some of the work of like IASC, Institute of Science, and the Bashni kind of initiative. We also seeing like amazing like entrepreneurs also in this space. We were just Nidhi, who leads our India operations right here in the back, and I were just in rural Ethiopia like in October, and we met this like entrepreneur who was creating his own speech models for Ethiopian languages. And the way he was doing it was he would take some existing llama model, curate a bunch of like local Ethiopian YouTube content, and then train it on that. And initially it's not like super great, but then he would do like this whole RLHF, reinforcement learning with human feedback process on it. And he got like pretty good accuracy. We found like it was even better than like the off-the-shelf like whisper models for some of these Ethiopian speech to text and text to speech. And I'd say though at the same time like these big tech people are kind of doing same-ish things at their more bigger level. So like how I was sharing about this Meta Omni model. It's like, yeah, supporting all these like languages that were not supported even just like 2 weeks before. Like this language in Sierra Leone, technique that we're trying to like work now in Sierra Leone. And no model is supporting that. So I think like one of the revelations to us has been we as a domain kind of specific organization and working on a domain specific application farmer chat, we don't need to be involved in trying to create some of the base language support. We were trying to do that in the beginning for some languages like Bhojpuri and Gikuyu in Kenya. But we realized that these government, Bashni type initiatives, and big tech people's initiatives are like they're already running at like way orders of magnitude more resources than we have. But what we can do is augment them specifically for the ag domain. So that's what I would hope for. For if you're like in the health or education domain, my guess would be that these models, like how we're finding, are not tuned specifically for agriculture or for education or health. That's what we can like be value adding is like let's add those components and not try to reinvent the base language because that requires a lot more hours of data and a lot more compute. Whereas when I'm just adding the ag specific component, that is not it's more practical.
Just building on the audio question,
Yeah.
do you envision an offering where farmers can call in a line and then be guided to the responsive by a voice agent? Is that a scenario you're looking at? How far are you?
Yeah, no, I mean, early on we did try to do like what you just said, like basically connect a voice bot to an IVR system. It was just a kind of complex of a UX for people to traverse. In the same way that IVR in general is often a complex UX for people to traverse. It is an important thing, like to figure out like how do you serve the people who don't have a smartphone. I would say that like the number of the smartphone people are obviously increasing. We do have situations where the other languages, you're going to have to go through a lot of steps, right? Of like speech to text, translation, return of answer. And you still may not be able to resolve what the person is asking about because if they don't have a way to submit, say, like a photo to, and they have to then explain what is this visual pattern on a leaf that I'm trying to diagnose. It's just hard. Yeah, I mean, I hear that sentiment, and it's a good one to try to address. But I think the better one for now is probably to like have the in-person people who might have the phone to use it on behalf of people who don't have a phone. That might be better.
This is that great presentation. Thank you. Clarifying question: the places where you operate, the beneficiaries would it be fair to say that they have lower digital fluency? It would be.
Yeah.
So then, I'd like to understand what were some of the key things that you did to sort of then bridge that gap when this thing, when the application became easy for them to experience.
I'd say the big one is providing suggested queries based on the cropping calendar that are specific to your location and time of year. So in fact, about 70% of the queries are not that the farmer is asking in their own articulated way. Rather, we're suggesting it to them as a prompt from like some neighbor's query or just based on like your location and your commodities of interest. We're suggesting to you like, hey, do you want to learn about like this pest issue that is happening in tomato in your area? So I think that's the biggest one.
What about the step before that? Like, because I'm assuming that they would not be used to operating with smartphones, talking to an interface like this, and now you're going to, the rural heartland of some country, and you tell them, hey, this can make your life better. I guess that's a hard conversation to have.
So in the beginning, we were first trying to do it over a WhatsApp and Telegram bots. Some people were more familiar, but I would say that UX was also quite clunky because not everyone knows how to like push and hold the voice note button, right? And then the other component I'd say is like that we still are trying to work on is like on the onboarding flow. There's like you might ask them a lot of questions to be like, oh, what's your location and what's your crops of interest? Because you want to try to personalize their experience. But on the other hand, that creates a ton of friction also. And they might be like, I don't want to answer all these questions. I just want to like see value first. So when we first started, we were trying to do in-person kind of like training workshops and stuff to like, not even at the farmer level. We were actually doing it more at the extension agent level. That was also partially because we were trying to make sure that bad information didn't go directly to the farmers. And this was like relatively early days, 2 or 3 years ago, like the systems were even more hallucinating that they still do, right? So we were kind of going with the extension agent as a gatekeeper before trying to get it to the farmer. Now, after doing a bunch of this kind of like reinforcement learning stuff, we feel more confident that like we can take it to like the farmers in the places that we've been doing some of this eval stuff. But even when we enter into a new geography, basically have to repeat that exercise. And then to your UX question, there's a lot of like simplification that we're still working on, including like some of the stuff I showed you about like the videos feature, the leaderboard stuff. That's also become kind of clunky in terms of like a user experience. And we're currently trying to simplify the whole UX just around the main 2 features that we're seeing the farmers mostly use, which is they like the suggested queries, because they use that a lot, and they like the ability to also ask my own query with a photo or whatever. So rather than having all these different like functions, we're trying to keep it simpler, which is I think critical if you're going to be able to see scale and repeat engagement continue the way that we are. So far so good, but I think if we want to get to the next order of magnitude, it's got to be even simpler, because otherwise you're not going to be able to keep doing these like in-person training sessions. That itself then increases your like go-to-market distribution cost, right? So we've done stuff like in-app tutorials and guides and things like that, but some of it is just like your user experience is broken. I just have to simplify it.
How often is one user asking?
On average, they're asking enjoying a second season. Some people do, some people don't. Some people are doing livestock. Livestock is more continuous a thing. Yeah.
I have a question. So I think specifically for smallholding farmers, which digital really focuses on,
Yeah.
the productivity is kind of the main metric that you probably want to improve. Like most statistics say that India has a lot of acres of cultivation, but the productivity per acre is probably lower than expected. How are you able to measure that, increase in that, or like we expect the farmer chat to increase that in a measurable way?
We expect we have to get connected. So like, I mean, in our earlier version of Digital Green with the video stuff, we were able to measure, you know, like how I showed the 35 to $3.5 US kind of reduction of cost per farmer. And we were able to see productivity increase around like 24% for rice paddy farmers in Bihar for some of the video stuff that we were doing. Now, we have 3 RCTs that have just started in India, Ethiopia, Bihar, Kenya, and Ethiopia. And this will definitely be part of that, is to like look, ultimately, you're seeing usage, you're seeing adoption, like that's 60% adoption rate, that's 60 decibels down. But then ultimately, what did that translate to in terms of productivity? I think the hypothesis would be like that relative to the video work, where we were only able to show 1 to 2 videos to a given group of farmers per month, and then their take-up rate or adoption rate of those practices was around 15%. Here, when they're asking 11 questions per farmer per month, and you're seeing an adoption rate of about 60% of those practices on the field, then you should see some delta in productivity, but that we have not yet measured.
I mean, the RCT is hard, right? Because everyone has access to internet. You can't stop them from Googling the same questions on Google. So
Yeah.
how do you like
No, that's true, but you're doing a randomized control trial in much the same way that you do video. So like, some people get access to the farmer chat application. That's the random intervention. And then the control group is everything else. In-person extension, Google, whatever stuff that people have. And then what you're trying to measure is the delta of the people who got farmer chat. What was the gain that they saw? It is interesting, actually, from a RCT methodological point of view. It's different from like our video work. In like our video work, we were able to tell like the RCT, survey research organization people to be like, oh yeah, go and we showed say like a rice video. Go and measure the rice crop yield. But in this case, the farmers who are using Farmer Chat are actually asking a mix of different crop and livestock kind of queries. So the surveyors kind of have to tune their survey instrument to be a little bit more dynamic, to being like, I guess I have to measure what the people are actually asking about, and not just like some arbitrary thing that people push on them.
So just coming back to this, right? Why don't you just look at income, or is that not like a good indicator for actually thinking about like, is my intervention actually making a difference? Because going on back to per acre or any of those things, isn't it a direct thing to just look at farmer household income and see if it's going up because of these practices rather than not? Or is that not like
Yeah. Well, in general, like that is like, because income is like super hard for like anyone to measure. But generally, the way that people measure that is by looking at assets in the households, what they increase. But in agriculture, you can also look at certain crops and try to measure the yield difference, or livestock systems, and you can try to measure, did I make a delta difference in the yield? So like with our videos in the past, like that's what we would do, and the researcher would do, to be like, this video about, say, let's just say like line sowing of rice. For the farmers who didn't see that line sowing of rice video, what was their yield? For the people who did see that line sowing video, how many people did that thing? And then of those people who did that thing, what was their relative difference in yield versus those who did not? So you can kind of do that for a couple of things, and that's how we're kind of talking to the RCT researchers, is to say that let's just look at the usage data. We're not going to be able to survey, and they're not going to be able to measure every single like yield difference. That would be intractable. But for the most popular experimenting with other ways to generate revenue, maybe with some of that lead gen to some of these service providers, which can include like the government. The government is like the biggest provider in agriculture for different types of subsidized inputs. They procure things, you know, for the public distribution system, they procure rice and other commodities. So if we are at scale, we're not at scale. 670 is amazing, 670,000 is amazing, but like if you were actually getting like millions of farmers, then maybe this becomes an interesting enough channel for government and other parties to say, yes, I could use that to hopefully create win-win outcomes for the farmers. We would want to be careful